Let's start with the first question. Like, what role does believing play in this whole thing? Believing in, for lack of better words, non-duality.
Uh, Well, it would have no role to play in it at all. Non-duality is kind of the antithesis of belief. It's kind of what you're left with when belief ends and you just work with what you got, your direct experience of life, which does not need to be believed in. And if you stick with that, then your experience becomes very non-dualistic. So belief is what was that? Who was the guy that said belief means not wanting to know what's true? I think it was Nietzsche, wasn't it? Somebody, yeah. Yeah, so
Um,
that kind of sums it up.
we're using the word non-duality. Is that just because we have to use words?
Yeah, well, we don't have to. We could just sit here silently
Yeah.
looking, but I don't know how
Um.
good the podcast would be.
hmm.
As soon as we open our mouths, then we try to point to this with words, and we're kind of forced to use a word like that.
Could you say something more about silence and the role that plays?
Yeah, well, silence is the purest form of non-duality. When you're truly silent, you're not here. The thinker is not here. And so the division maker is not here.
Mm.
And everything that's real remains. But there's no kind of mental division happening anymore when there's silence. And that's non-duality. So right now, everything I say, there's an opposite to what I say.
Mm.
So everything I say could be contested. It could be argued with. And that's the unfortunate part of talking about this instead of silence is, you know, there's always going to be it doesn't matter how many people out there might agree with what I say because it's subject to its opposite. There's always going to be a group of people that are like, "Meh,"
Hmm.
saying the exact, exact opposite. But it seems like, what's the expression? Using a thorn to remove a thorn. So that's kind of what we're doing, I guess.
Okay. Yeah. You said you can't argue with silence. Could you go a little bit deeper on that?
Well, silence doesn't require belief.
Mm.
Everything that you experience in silence, everything you become aware of in silence is factual, and you can't argue with the facts. So
Mm.
as soon as you start to describe what you're experiencing in that silence, then you can be argued with. Does that
Um,
answer?
yeah, we have to use words. So that might be the end of the podcast.
That was
Yeah.
fun while it lasted.
Yeah. Do you find it challenging to, you wrote a few books about the subject, to use words to describe what you're talking about?
Do I find it hard to write about it?
Yeah.
No, because I don't really take it seriously. If anybody that's read anything I've written knows I don't write with a whole lot of seriousness. I'm direct in what I write, but I don't kind of sugarcoat it in this pious layer of
Mm.
spirituality. So it's fun when I write. I'm just open to what wants to come through. And a lot of the time there's hints of humor here and there. So that's fun. Fun to kind of channel that.
So since we're structuring this episode like a college session, what role does like the intellect and investigating it through like research and reading all the books that play?
Yeah. So the source of all suffering is the mind, the one that researches and tries to figure it all out. But it's almost like it needs to get to a point where it becomes very clear that it itself is the problem.
Mm.
So there's a ton of, cathartic ways for that to happen. And there's no right way. There's no way that's better than another. If it's yoga or you're practicing Zen or you're meditating all the time or you're just really into hardcore non-dual self-inquiry, it's always the mind trying to better itself. And so that's needed until it gets to a point where it sees the futility in it all. And then finally it's ready to just give up on itself.
It does seem like there's a very small amount of people who actually make it to the end.
Well, there's 100% of people make it to the end.
Mhm.
It's inevitable. Maybe in this particular lifetime, maybe not so much. I mean,
Mm.
obviously, you look around and the world's pretty nuts. So, but ultimately, consciousness is awakening, it's returning to itself, and it's not going to stay asleep forever. So, everybody is consciousness, regardless of how sleepy they are.
So we started the episode with asking about belief. Do you believe in non-duality? Is like belief a part of like your existence, for lack of better words?
No, do I believe in anything?
No, like I'd say like on my side, it's more like a belief. I think this is the end game. Like I did all the research and all the meditation and the psychedelics, and I think it's right over here. It's around this area.
Yeah.
But
So
mm,
sorry, go on.
so it's more of a belief, but there's this active like questioning it.
Yeah,
What is it?
and that's a blessing to see that it's still a belief and it's not really this felt sense direct experience of reality, that you're assigning it to the belief category is a good thing, because then it
Mm,
means you're not just going to hang your hat there. You're going
mm,
to continue looking closer and closer. Yeah, if you think about it, if any part of a free human existence involves having to believe in something, that's pretty shitty.
yeah,
You know, freedom shouldn't require any thought at all about anything, right? It should just
right,
be free, should be easy and effortless, and silence should be enough.
right. So we use the word belief. I would say for non-duality, it's a little bit more like a conspiracy theory that nobody's really interested in, but a few people like. I think this is real. I think this is the real deal.
Yeah, it's the closest word human language can come to for describing ultimate truth.
So I'd say for many people, including myself, for a long time, it's just something we read in the books or seen in a documentary, or
Oh,
until you meet a person like yourself, or where it
have you,
transitions into something more.
when you were reading all those books, even before you met any kind of teacher,
Mm.
did you have non-dual type of experience, or like,
Well, during meditation, some unique experiences, but 6 months later, you're back to normal. And also with psychedelics, very strange experiences. And 2 years later, back to
yep,
normal.
that you mean like the mind opening up to a much bigger reality and then it becoming a bit frightened that it might lose itself in that, or?
I would say it's more like it's integrating the new experience, but still going forward. So it becomes slightly more real when you encounter a real living teacher. Like, I think this guy's telling the truth.
Yeah, yeah. My particular story didn't involve talking to someone directly, but I
Mm.
came across teachers through books, and there is a qualitative difference when you encounter words from someone that does not require belief. There's something really alive about it. Yeah,
Since you said you didn't meet a teacher in the when you were seeking,
not
what was
directly.
right? Like since I mean, a lot of people are interested in enlightenment and waking up, but Kyle Hoobin did it. You know,
What do you mean? What do you mean?
like like well, you weren't seeking enlightenment when you were
Well, I was, and
okay,
that's why I say, I didn't call it enlightenment.
right?
What people are thinking about when they think of enlightenment, when a non-dual person talks about enlightenment, they're thinking
Mm,
of a state where they're just free. They feel
uh,
free. There's no more problems, or at least there's no more mechanism that continuously creates problems. And there's just,
mm,
and that's what I just didn't call it enlightenment. I didn't call it
mm.
non-duality. I called it, at the time, it was sex. That was
uh,
my label. Everybody has a label for enlightenment in their own life,
mm,
whether they call it that or not. Everybody's trying to seek a point where they can just bloody relax
uh,
and not struggle.
I guess I was kind of pointing out like what made you so focused on being finished?
Yeah. Well, the way I had been kind of programmed, part that wanted to avoid failure was also the part that kind of solidified a very specific timeline
Mm,
for success.
right.
And so there was a very loud ticking clock in my particular story. And because of that, things unfolded rapidly and early on.
So this kind of brings up the topic of practice, like a thing, the method. Would you say self-inquiry was your method or the thing that you applied?
Yeah, I think in the beginning it was trying to solve the problems on the level of the mind. So trying to love myself better,
Mm,
trying to feel like it was not a mistake, that it was a lot of positive reinforcement happening, and then that gradually became not enough because that core belief that I was fundamentally flawed was still there. I needed something more direct, more potent, and so then I drifted more into direct teachings like about the present moment, and
mm.
what was the question? I can't remember if I answered it.
It's seemed like you were applying a self-inquiry method or being in the moment method.
Yeah,
So,
eventually, I never was a good student. I never
mm,
loved practicing anything. So the teaching that I was most drawn to was the most simplistic one, the one
mm,
that could be summed up in one sentence, which was Eckhart's teaching, which is just live in the now, don't leave it, because if you do, it's a lie. And just
mm,
recognize that this now is all there is, and there can be no suffering if you're actually right now. That was the golden key right there. So I wanted a definitive end to my suffering, one that I could experientially verify. So when I heard, okay, if I live in the now, there's no suffering possible there. Yes, that's true. If I'm totally present, that means I'm not thinking about anything, including myself. Therefore,
mm.
there's no problem. There's no suffering. So that was true. And that's all I needed. Yeah. That's the only teaching I really needed.
You said you weren't a good student, and we have our non-duality class right now. I would say,
Well,
is
I had the one thing that every
mm,
teacher uh, wishes their students would have, which is
mm.
100% commitment. So in that sense, I was a good student, I guess.